whether you work provincially or whether you're working in a local community or wherever you are working, I think there are some basic things that we all understand, and you know this better than I do. So first of all, having the data is very important, building the evidence base, building a good foundation, putting it together with local knowledge so you have contextual information, making sure that you distribute information in many different ways, that you have conversations, that you provide some products, that you do, you engage with different types of communities in different types of ways and use different language. Don't start new partnerships. If you have partnerships that are current and that are working, build on the success that you have already experienced. And perhaps, seeing you are so patriotic and nationalistic, you are very used to saying, stop, let us do this in a way that suits us and suits you, and work together to do that. Having authority, I think, is really important. Finding people in your community who have funding, who are there to write the policy, and I know some of you are here from government and from policy areas. Understanding who those people are and being able to influence them is terribly important. Having a framework that you all agree to, that is established. Not a new framework, but if you do have a new framework, try and fit it in with what you have that works already. When you're implementing something, whatever it is, understand who does what. It's very, very important. And of course, the evaluation and review of the activity and the work that is being done is important. And then once that's done, you go back to the beginning and you start again. The next slide is just the last message that I leave you with, and this is exactly what you know, but this is some work that we're doing in the province of Victoria, which is basically coming together with local communities and asking local communities in our conversations, where do you sit? Are you at the beginning where you're not being able to do much with the data? Are you in the middle? Or are you actually an example of very good practice, and would you like to be involved in conversations so you can model this with other communities? At the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to meet up with some people from different places who have been doing work with the EDI, and I'm interested in Alberta and Quebec and certainly in Vancouver, where I've spent the last week, and other places in Australia, of course, in different communities, to actually work with them on a guide. How do you actually come to a point where you can actually understand how well a community is actually doing on the continuum? Once you understand that, you actually start to understand their ability to change their system. You understand where they are in relation to systems change. And I think we can all do better, and so this is a very important part of the work. And I wish you all the very best in it. I will watch with very close eyes. I have many friends in Quebec, and I come back on a regular basis, and I will certainly be following up with all of you. So good luck, and thank you for inviting me.
I'll say two things mainly. The first one is, I'm not sure, I'll start with a question. How many of you use the word or hear of the word accountability when it comes to government and expectations? And for how many of you is that a good or a negative concept? How many good? And for how many that's challenging? Okay, or it's both, you know, okay. Because so accountability, I mean, if you look at the word, and often it comes from people who have power and they can set expectations. So in government, the way it's used, you know, you set high expectations for certain things, which I think is the important part and the really critical aspect. When we talk about children's development, we should have high expectations. We should expect that all our kids are going to do well. That's the convention of the rights of the child. You know, we expect that all of the kids have good experiences, that we provide the resources that they can thrive. So high expectations are very important. When you have high expectations and you put it in an accountability framework, And now I'm partly reflecting on what you've seen in the United States, and I can't say for the national or the federal context to what extent that is always true, but what's really damaging, I think, when you have accountability but no support. So in the United States, you know the No Child Left Behind. How many of you have heard of the No Child Left Behind? And then if somebody knows the French translation, if that doesn't ring a bell, is there a French...
There's probably a Spanish translation.
Okay. So, I mean, so I'll just say in a couple of sentences. So it's a No Child Left Behind. It was actually a bill that was passed by both the Democrats and the Republicans, a rare thing these days. So both supported it. And in principle, it sounds good. It says, well, we should support every child, at the different levels in terms of their literacy and their social, emotional well-being and their health and what have you. So it's a nice-looking bill. Again, it's very unpopular to be against children's well-being, so everybody votes for it. But then, do you know what happened? The resources, the budget for it was systematically cut or sometimes completely slashed. So basically what they said to everyone, okay, we have these expectations, but don't expect that you're gonna get any support. If anything, they said, if you're underperforming, we'll punish you and we'll take away the few resources that you've just gotten. So in fact, if schools that were not performing well, were not improving, the government would come in and say, well, obviously you don't know what you're doing, so we'll take away the resources and we'll have some private institutions, charter schools and what have you, come in and take over. And again, I'm just saying that's one extreme. I'm not trying to infer or to convey that it's where it's happening and how it's happening. I'm just saying accountability in itself is a neutral thing. And that's what we saw in your responses. A lot of people say, well, it can be good or bad. It's not something about accountability in itself. What I'm getting at is how much support do we then give when there is high expectations, when there's an accountability plan. And so when you ask a question, the way I reflect on it, what can a national government or a provincial government or territory government do in terms of supporting the local and regional activities? I think it's critical, it's absolutely critical to set high expectations, to be clear about them, and then to see how can we best provide all the resources and the support to those people who have to work on these things. In BC, I know that the government is quite explicit in their support for the EDI, but the EDI is of course just a data collection tool. It's not a goal in itself. You can't say, well, as long as we collect EDI data, we're good. In fact, you saw that the results in some domains have gotten worse over time. That's not fulfilling anybody's accountability. That's just keeping track. It's really just a tool to keep track of how we're doing in regard to the expectations and goals we're setting. But they're quite explicit that there are these expectations, and not just for kindergarten. They're also in place, and I know they're in everybody's school accountability plans. You always set certain goals for what you expect, where you expect your children to be, and I think it's very important to be transparent about those, and then to see. And then in terms of the support, there are of course different things. Well, we can talk about the money, but that's the simple piece in terms of the discussion. We all realize that there need to be resources in order to support certain things. The other piece is a little less tangible in a way, and that's, I think, being a role model and being present in the community. It comes back to some of the principles we discussed already. If we have people from government who come to help as a data collection initiative, if we have regular meetings with the ministry and understand what their take is on the EDI and how they're going to use it, this is really validating our work. We have regular meetings. If you work in a local coalition for early child development and you have a minister or their deputies or representatives from the government and come up and show up for all these meetings and say, here's the support we're providing, here are the expectations, it's really important that there's this exchange, that people make the connection at a personal level. And I think it's also coming back to what both Lynn and Kathy said in terms of understanding each other's roles. There's a lot of conceptions about what other people do in government and in research and practitioners. Everybody has different needs. The more we can talk, the more we understand where everybody else is coming from. So being clear and present and listening to each other about these expectations, but then also how we can best provide the support, I think that's really critical. So having said all this, I'll maybe just take 1 minute to find an internet resource that I think has to do with this whole idea of being accountable, but then how do you keep track of that, and then how do you use that to support different communities? And thanks. See if you can. So yeah, I hope it will work. It's an online resource we have at the help website. So when you go to the EDI maps, oh thanks. I'll stick with the same. No, here I'll do Surrey. There are these maps for each district. And when we say district in BC, I'm referring to school districts, but you can think of local health areas, delivery areas, however you cut it up. This is the way we often do it, or by cities. And then for each of the city, I showed you Coquitlam earlier. This is another city in the Lower Mainland. You see the maps, you have seen those before, you see the patterns. There's another tool at the bottom that we just went online, and it's the critical difference map. So now that we have data over time, and speaking of accountability and what can the public officials do to support local initiatives, here's Surrey, and go for the last 2 waves actually. So you see at the top, thanks. You see at the top, you can select which wave, which data collection wave you want to look at for your reference point. And then you have your comparison wave, which in our case, we always made the most recent wave is always the comparison wave. Where are we now? And how does it compare to where we were before? And because we have more than 2 time points, you have a choice for how many before points you can choose. And then what this map shows you for all the neighborhoods that we just saw the vulnerability rates for Surrey in this particular case, you can see, did we improve or did we get worse? Exactly. And so whenever you see green, so for these 2 neighborhoods, when you hover over it, you see this is Guilford East. And you see when I hover over here, there's the percentage and the change percentage. When you go over this neighborhood, it shows, okay, we decreased our vulnerability by 10%. We got better, 10% between wave 4 and wave 5. So that's a significant change. And then you go to this neighborhood, Clayton, the vulnerability actually increased by 9%. Whenever you have a gray area, they still have data, but it means there was nothing significant. They stayed more or less the same. And there's a statistical algorithm underneath that we developed to calculate whether it's significant or not. So whether you're green, red, or nothing significantly happening. So that's a tool that we have, but it really plays into how a government looks at. If the government keeps track of what's happening and they're fairly transparent and in their expectations, and they say, well, here's where we are now. We're doing these initiatives. Where do we want to be in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever? And then you track that, and then there's a communication back with the communities and saying, well, here's how we actually went, this is where we actually are going. So in terms of literacy, they could maybe tell a little bit of a success story, but we just had the discussion here during the intermission. In terms of social emotional, it's not really success story, it's the opposite. Things are going in the other direction. And we had the slide, of course, up yesterday. So if the government then is transparent about, okay, here were the goals we're setting, and this is where we're going, again, it's not about a blame game or anything. It's sitting down together and saying, okay, what are the things then that worked? And what are the things that maybe did not work? And I think, at least for us at HELP, whenever we see that discussion happening, and it has been in BC, it has been quite regular that we had ministry representatives, local representatives, and the researchers in the same room, we could regularly come back together, discuss this and say, are we going in the right direction? If yes, how can we make sure that this is going to be sustainable? If we're not going in the right direction, what are some ideas? Let's look at some communities that are doing really well. Let's look at what they're doing. Let's look at other provinces, other ideas, and see if we can maybe adjust the path on which we are. So that's, at least from my researcher perspective, what I've been seeing, I think a quite promising way of, I'm not saying it always works, and as you're saying, there's some success stories, some where it's not, but in terms of the process, that's what I've seen as something that I think is quite promising in terms of building those connections and seeing that support from making the connections bottom up and top down and bringing all the different sectors together.
That's okay. That's okay. No, I don't need your map.
No, that's fine, but it's still.
Oh, okay.
Even though it's closed.
Well, I don't think I can add anything to this conversation that you don't already know yourselves, because you've been in the field for so long, and you've probably been on that uphill struggle. I think that one of the things we have to remember is early childhood is not a hard sell, right? It's an easy sell, and we are equipped with all the evidence we need to know that putting resources and supports in early childhood makes a difference. I have never seen anything where we have so much evidence and it's still taking so much time to move it forward. It's unbelievable when you think about it. There is no contradictory evidence out there that, supporting young children doesn't pay off later on in life. And yet, somehow, that message is not being translated to our governments. And we're still supporting young children in silos. So what we need in your nation, I don't need a passport to get here, so I'm having a hard time buying into that, but I'll live in both worlds. So I think what we need in our provinces and nationally is a comprehensive, integrated, non-negotiable approach to early childhood. And we need to continue to advocate for that. It's not going to be easy because we're asking government, one, to work collaboratively amongst ministries, which I don't know about here, but in Alberta is very difficult to do, although we're starting. We do have what we call a tri-ministry of health, human services, and education. But they struggle because nobody can let go of their agenda. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to. Let's face it, a third of our children experiencing great difficulty before they enter kindergarten is not acceptable. It's not acceptable in anybody's books. And as the voice, the collective voice for young children, we need to speak loudly. And I think that that's the only way we're going to affect change. At the end of the day, ministers and the people that serve this country are public servants. And to me, that always means they serve me as the public. They serve the mom in the community that has 3 children that can't put food on the table and that is working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. They serve the public. And so if we raise our voices and we raise the volume, and I always say, what we don't want to do is create noise. We want to raise the volume on a collective message around early childhood so that when we're speaking, we're talking about the same things. And I think that that's the thing we've struggled with. Our governments, all of them, have been often very good at putting Band-Aid solutions and responding to whoever's got the loudest voice. But it's not always what all communities need. Here's a perfect example. In Alberta, we've got government, one of the ministries, just put $20 million. $20 million to do innovative practices in community. That's nice. But at the end of the day, we don't need innovative practices to raise our children. we have all the basic information, we've got all the basic tools. What we need to do is create a society where parents aren't struggling to meet basic needs, where they have accessible to good quality childcare, where they can make real choices, not fake ones, and they can support their kids, because parents will always do what's best when given the right support. No parent gives birth to children and says, well, I'm really going to screw this one up, right? They do the best they can with what they have in their toolbox. And if they're struggling to put food on the table, put a roof over their head, trying to get to work, and long days, it's pretty hard to pay attention to child development in maybe the 15 minutes you've got left at the end of the day. So I think we have to continue to advocate that our approach to early childhood be comprehensive, be integrated across ministries, and be given equal importance to all the other ones, and that it becomes non-negotiable, that it doesn't get taken off the table when we have a global financial crisis, when the price of oil goes down, or when something more important comes up. Because let's face it, there is nothing more important than supporting our young children who are tomorrow's citizens, who are tomorrow's leaders. That was my soapbox.